Welcome back. The U.S. Supreme Court says that federal courts do not have the authority to rule on questions of partisan gerrymandering. This ruling could have an effect on the 2020 election. So how do young voters see the ruling, and could it be an issue for them when they go to the voting booth next year? Joining us for more on that tonight are two up-and-coming young political observers. Johnny Saline is a past president of the College Democrats in North Carolina. Luke Stancil, Republican consultant. Guys, welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show. John, what did you think of the ruling last week?
Well, in my mind, I think it is bad news for the United States and bad news for partisan gerrymandering across the country. Luckily, it is a sort of a bright light for North Carolina because of the Democratic control now that we have on the Supreme Court. The federal courts are now ruling that they have no grounding in such matters like this, and it should be left to state legislatures and state courts. I'm pretty confident that the Supreme Court will in turn reverse this decision on the state level and order that maps be redrawn by our General Assembly. So a little bit of good news for North Carolina, but a lot of states aren't so lucky.
Luke, what do you think?
Well, here's the thing. I think Chief Justice Roberts had the right ruling on this and the majority opinion, because the federal Constitution doesn't state the parameters and the criteria when it comes to redistricting. And since 2005, they've been proposing bills in Congress vouching for that independent redistricting commission, criteria, things of that nature. And they left it back up to the legislature, the legislative branch, to decide what the criteria and what should happen when it comes to redistricting, but it really got the courts from picking political winners and losers when it comes to gerrymandering cases. So for North Carolina Republicans, we were happy that we were able to hold our congressional maps. But Maryland Republicans, such as Governor Larry Hogan, was not happy about that. So you can look at it from different states. From Maryland to North Carolina, it was vice versa for each party. So I think Chief Justice Roberts actually got it right on this one. So
well, we'll see what happens. And the role, and of course, the question too is no matter how the state Supreme Court rules, will the state, the loser, try to take it up to the U.S. Supreme Court? We'll see what happens with that. Some people, depends on your belief of our legal system. I'm curious. Do you think young folks are paying attention to this or even understand what redistricting is? And I mean outside of our bubble.
Yeah. I come from rural Scotland County, North Carolina. And you would be surprised at the amount of people who are starting to pay attention to this news cycle about gerrymandering, because you have to realize the Republicans have had control over the General Assembly now for going on almost a decade. And what we would consider to be some legislation that is not progressive, that's been tearing North Carolina in the foundation, and which holds us up part of the past 10 years. Every day we're seeing more and more people become aware of this. So after the Supreme Court decision, I'm seeing folks outside of my political bubble on Twitter, on Facebook, and other social media platforms talking about this. New programs like the College Democrats of America, you're talking about programs, Democracy NC, are building new and young recruits now, folks who were not involved in politics years ago, but now starting to get involved because of these issues. They're realizing that one person, one vote does not realize and come to reality here in North Carolina.
Luke? Well, to instance, for you were talking about with Scotland County, Senator Tom McGinnis. Yeah. He's in a Democrat-favored district when it comes to voter registration. If you look at it, when actually they drew the maps for the state legislature, 27 districts out of 50 favored Democrats when it came to voter registration. So I don't believe in that argument, and one of the things that I'll kind of revert back to is about these groupings. The Duplin-Onslow grouping in the State House, where you have Representative Jimmy Dixon, Shepherd, and Cleveland, they're trying to, what Common Cause and Democracy NC are trying to do is throw spaghetti at the wall to see if it sticks. Because, John, I'll tell you, you and I can go back to my office after this, and we can go out and try to carve out a district where you think a Democrat can win in that grouping of Duplin and Onslow County, and you won't be able to do it unless what you really want is more split precincts, more split subdivisions, more split communities, and more split counties. But our state constitution requires, when we schedule these groupings, that they're whole counties.
So go ahead. I'll respond to that.
Okay, so let me respond to this about Senator McInnes, my state senator. You're looking at a district that the Democrats kept in 2012 after then retired Senator Bill Purcell retired from the state Senate. Gene McLaurin, former Mayor Rockingham, took over that Senate seat. 2012, we get into this year, Republicans add a sliver of Rowan County within the district, which adds about 7,000 more Republicans. Senator McLaurin at the time did so well in his campaign that he only came about 2,500 votes short. But as we progressed and the Republicans held their hands on North Carolina, is that we saw not only that portion of Rowan State. We're getting slivers of Stanley County that's adding 2,000 more Republicans. So you're talking about this Democratic favorite district. But what we're actually looking at here is the Republicans in the General Assembly building more and more of a power base by selectively building more Republicans into a district that at one time was controlled by Democrats. You're only having 3 counties in Senate District 25, Scotland, Richmond, and Anson, that are the Democratic strongholds. He'd even win his home county in 2012.
So we only got about a minute and a half left. So what I want to ask you, though, is, 2020 rolls around, Democrats win the state House and the state Senate. Do you still feel the same way about this court's ruling and how redistricting is done? Because Democrats are going to draw maps that are favorite to them.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the thing is that for 150 years, Democrats drew the maps in North Carolina, and in 2010, Republicans won. And we're going to continue to win, and I'll tell you why. It's because the failure of the Democrat Party on messaging in rural communities. You have 17 members in the state House that are mostly in rural communities that are Republicans, that are in Democrat favored by voter registration districts, and 8 in the state Senate. And Democrats have forgotten the 4 House Democrats, and they were black rural Democrats such as Bobby Richardson, George Graham, Ron Wesson, and Darrell Moss, where they tried to run up the score in Wake and Mecklenburg counties, and that's great. You outspent us 4-1. But also, and you only got 20,000 more votes than us in a blue wave year. But what you've got to do is, if you're a Democrat, you've got to go back to your rural communities, because they're not putting up candidates like a Jim Hunt that were pro-education, pro-business, pro-life, and pro-Second Amendment, and you have forgotten Bobby Richardson, who was in a heavy Democrat district, but Lisa Stone Barnes was able to win. So Democrats have to work on their messaging in rural communities.
Go ahead, respond quickly.
Well, one thing I always talk about is this constant urban-rural divide in North Carolina political scene. I think Democrats have been a champion for what makes North Carolina great in rural communities. You're talking about education, you're talking about the expansion of community colleges, things that we saw during Democratic control. I think my party, for the most part, has done a great job. As always, there's more work to do to bring those folks back in. But what you're seeing is an aggressive, targeted attack against all things that Democrats have done over the past 30, 40 years by those on the other side of the aisle. And as you can tell, there are districts that Democrats are starting to really put work into. You're seeing now in the 9th Congressional District, a district that should be won by Republicans in the way that they gerrymandered the district.
But there's 40,000 more registered Democrats in the 9th Congressional District than there are Republicans. 10 out of 13 districts in the congressional 10 out of 13 districts that are in the congressional maps, they are favored to Democrats in voter registration. That's what I go back to.
So
messaging.
let me say this. Let me say
real
this.
quick, and then we got to wrap.
All right, last thing. When this case came before the Supreme Court, you have Justice Kagan, Justice Sotomayor. They point out how, we have 24,000 different projections that this computer came up with, and 0.7% of those, so about 163, 164, are the ones that came with a 10-3 split. The Republicans wanted to make sure that the 9th District stayed Republican. That is exactly what they're trying to do. And if they're successful in the way they did the maps, they'll be successful in the special election.
We will find politics out of politics.
We'll find out in September. Gentlemen, good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for tonight. As always, if it's on Jones Street or Main Street, you will find it right here in Capitol tonight. Have a great Wednesday. We'll see you on the 4th of July with a new show.